Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be taking a look at the resources for the Exploration Age and doing a tier list. Now, as we get into it, there's kind of three little background discussions we need to have, or things we need to comment on. The first is, we are looking at the resources themselves, not the yields associated with the resources. And so, you can get resources through trade, you don't have to get them through working it yourself. And so, we are going to think of it in that way, specifically just the resources independent of the things. Now, the second thing is that, generally speaking, relative to antiquity, global resources are a lot better. That is because in antiquity, your resources are applying to 1 to 11, maybe, settlements. And so when you have a larger or smaller amount of settlements, especially on 1 to 2, the resources that give just raw yields, like the cotton, are going to be extremely valuable. You enter the age with 7 to 12 settlements, let's say, in the Exploration Age. So already the window in which raw resources are going to be extraordinarily valuable is very much closed. And then over the course of the age, you will acquire a lot more. And so, generally speaking, the global resources are going to be more valuable. Now, the third thing that we need to comment on is, in general, relative to antiquity, I also think being able to target resources in a particular spot is going to be really valuable. Now, in antiquity, being able to target stuff with production is going to be really valuable just in general, because production is worth more than gold is. And so when you have a production, you want to be putting it in cities specifically, and so being able to target the cities with your production is valuable. However, happiness targeting is much more valuable in the Exploration Age as well. You enter the Exploration Age with a bunch of cities, or a bunch of things that were cities that built a bunch of buildings that have negative happiness upkeep. Also, as a consequence of the metagame, where the hardest victory legacy path to go for, at least at this point in time, is the treasure fleet one, you want to book it towards getting the tech required for treasure fleets. This means you will not be getting happiness buildings to fix your negative happiness as early as you might, depending on what your run looks like. And so being able to target specific settlements with happiness resources is going to be valuable. But also, in general, food, spreadsheet warning, food is going to be more valuable the lower the amount of citizens you have. When you have lower citizens, and you look at the effect of getting 5 marginal food, in terms of how many growth events you get over the course of 100 turns, not taking into account the fact that it requires more to grow once you've already grown. Actually, let's take a look at kind of over here, because this is the Exploration Age we're talking about. You will see that food is way more valuable as your population's lower, and then as your population is higher, it gets way less valuable. Generally speaking, your population will be most polarized in exploration, because I think in modern you add much fewer settlements than you do in the Exploration Age, in the Modern Age specifically. And in the Exploration Age, you will have your cities from previous ages alongside your newly found settlements in distant lands. And so as a consequence of this, I do think being able to target the new settlements with food is really valuable, because you'll get these growth events much faster, and they will generate yields that more than pay for themselves in a much faster time frame than just slapping on the yields themselves. And so being able to food target is more valuable in this age than it was in the previous age. So with all that said, let's get into the discussion here. Now, the first point we're going to make is that the treasure fleet resources, we have our own separate category for them. They are going to be really valuable in general. I think they also have high yields, but that is a little bit less of the consideration. But they're going to be valuable because they allow you to do the legacy path. But beyond that, I think it's every 8 turns. I'm not sure the exact number of turns. They will generate a treasure fleet, and that treasure fleet is going to be worth 100 gold on a delay per resource. This means each one of these generates a little over 10 gold per turn as well, although it is on a delay. And while that 10 gold per turn is going to be worse than something like, let's say, 5 production, the fact that it is the victory condition is going to be valuable, or a legacy path condition is going to be really valuable, and it's going to allow you to put yourself in a better position in the next age, more than I think just regular production is going to be. And so I think in terms of your settling, you settle really aggressively for 2+ treasure fleet resources as a heuristic, and you almost don't care about other stuff, in this age with a lot of your settlements, as you just try and accomplish the age. I think it's not balanced. I think the treasure fleet or the economic legacy path is way harder than the other ones, and it's super warping in the exploration age. But as a consequence, we're going to put all the treasure fleet resources ahead of everything else, with the only thing that is remotely close is cloves, which is probably better, but we'll get into that when we get into that. Next up, we have gold. Now, gold is extremely valuable. It's a global resource, and generally speaking, when we think of gold versus production, there's kind of this weird tension. Everything in terms of its production cost is going to cost 4 times that amount in gold. However, gold is way more flexible and targeted. In your highest production city, you will have already built your most useful building, generally speaking, and so the production there is actually less productive than it would be in another place, whereas gold you can target anywhere, and you're going to be wanting to, in a lot of your new settlements, buy a lot of buildings so that you can access these treasure fleet resources faster, and so gold's going to be useful in that way, but also in your places that are a little bit behind on production, you'll be able to ensure that you are getting your best buildings up and coming. I think that generally you'll spend a lot more gold on units, or sorry, on buildings than you will on units over the course of the age, and so we are going to put the gold, which will give a 20% discount on buildings up there in S tier. Now, the way that it works is it's 1 over 1 plus the percentage. So it won't actually be a 20% discount. It says 20% more gold towards buildings or something like this. It effectively ends up being like a 16% discount. But we will also put silver here. We're going to talk about silver and marble together because I think it's kind of... these are a little bit... close together, but we're going to talk about them together. Silver will give you that same discount or more gold towards bonus on units. Specifically, we're going to put it on A tier, and this will give you more production. Now, it'll give you 10% production towards wonders. And just kind of looking at the math, if you spend 5,000 gold on units, then you will need to build like roughly 7 wonders to get the same raw value out of the marble as you could a gold resource. If you are assuming that gold is roughly 1/3 the value of a production. And so this means you really have to build a lot of wonders in the age for marble to outperform silver, or not buy a lot of units, this type of thing. I think your mileage will vary depending on which one you're doing a lot of, and maybe marble being better earlier on is gonna make it so that marble is just better overall, because I do think it's better overall early on, but I think that because you have to produce so many wonders to really get the value out of it, and also the place you're producing wonders is generally your high production places, and the production in those places is less valuable because you've already built the most critical buildings. We are going to put marble behind a silver, but they're both going to be very good. Next up, we have the 3 combat resources. Now, in terms of things, I think that I generally rate combat bonuses a little bit lower than other people, and I also pay less attention to combat, and so I'm less confident in my opinion, but my opinion is a little bit like this. If you get a combat bonus, that combat bonus needs to have a meaningful difference in order for it to actually been useful. So if you go from one-shotting a unit to one-shotting a unit, the combat bonus is useless, right? It effectively is not worth anything. If you go from having to avoid an engagement to having to avoid an engagement, it's also useless. And so it's specifically in areas where you go from winning an engagement or losing an engagement to winning an engagement, or being able to do something in X turns versus being able to do something in X minus 1 turns. In terms of the military, this is when it's good. I think that very often people look at the combat bonuses, they're like, wow, this is great, but that it doesn't make a marginal difference in terms of how things shake out. And so as such, I generally think that these are often not going to make a marginal difference at too many points over the course of an age, but something like whales will give a slight difference over the course of the age. That being said, these are global, so I do think that they are quite valuable because they're global, but a little bit less so because I think the combat bonus is maybe not so good. In Civilization specifically, though, +1 on combat is going to always be really good. So kind of a lot of things going on there, but we're going to put them in. I do think the horses is the weakest one because it's only applying to cavalry, but it applies to cavalry really hard. And if you have a unique cavalry unit, this will be way more useful, but we're going to put it here in C tier. Next up is Niter, which applies to ships and also to siege units. I think the siege unit one consideration is a little bit less useful, but siege weapons really taking cities down quickly is kind of nice in terms of that's giving you speed, right? But I do think that Navy is going to be the most dynamic kind of unit in general, and is going to be one that building it proactively is really useful. I think the AI is absolutely terrible at fighting on and around rivers, or they just kind of, if they don't have naval dominance, they will put their units on the water way too aggressively, and if their units are on the water, you can just clap the units' cheeks. And so I do think that, generally speaking, Navy is going to be pretty good, and would be the thing that we'd want to bonus on most. However, I think that the combination of giving infantry and ranged units a bonus is going to be really valuable, especially because your infantry kind of hold the line to some extent, and there's more unique units that are infantry than anything else in the age, I think. And so I think for most civs, iron's going to be more useful. Obviously, if you're playing like Mongols or something, we get this action where horses go up to A, but we're going to put this just ahead of the Niter there. And next up we have the cloves. I think it's +6 food, which is kind of not the relevant part as much as the +10% gold. +10% gold is going to be considerably more valuable than a gold discount because you're going to have other gold discounts. And also, this is just towards purchasing buildings. We're going to put this in S tier, but where it should really belong in terms of how good it is probably right here. And so, actually, for keeping things unambiguous, we'll put it at the top of Treasure Fleet, but this is not a Treasure Fleet resource. I do think it is more valuable. I would rather have this than a Treasure Fleet resource, but I think it's almost close. It's hard to say because the Treasure Fleet resource, again, if it's not pushing you over the course of the age, if you're like, if you get 25 points, 35 points, and you're goldening anyways, then this is way worse. If this is the resource that pushes you over the edge, then it's way better. So, difficult to evaluate. But next up, we have the wine, which gives, I think, 3 happiness in the capital and 10% culture when celebrating. This 10% culture when celebrating is great. It's going to be more valuable the more happiness you have. I think that happiness is a little bit harder. It's a little bit harder to be perma-celebrating, I think, in exploration than it is in antiquity, unless you've leaned into it. But I do think that this culture bonus is going to be quite good. This is going to be the same with foxes. It's going to give a happiness in the capital and 10% gold when celebrating. This is also going to be quite valuable. We're going to put it up in here in the S tier. All right, so now we have the non-global resources in here, and this is what we have remaining. But just taking a look at what's going on here, we have the Treasure Fleet resources, and then most of the power overall in the age, I think, is in these resources that are applying globally. And so that's why we wanted to do all those first, to really kind of highlight that the resources to go to are much more this than like the previous age where cotton was super good. It's not anywhere near as good now. Okay, next up we have truffles. This is a discount towards production of units. I think that in general, you want to be buying units rather than producing them, because very often the place that has an enormous amount of production is going to be far from where it is that you need the units. And so spending 1 to 3 turns to build a unit and then 8 turns to get a unit someplace doesn't feel as good as just buying it. And so you would rather spend your production on civilian units like missionaries or settlers, or more buildings, or even working on science or culture rather than building units as a general heuristic. I think this will give you a discount on settlers and missionaries as well, but it's not the biggest discount, and so I think proportionally you're not going to get too much value out of it. You're not going to get very much production worth of this, because of the nature of, generally speaking, wanting to buy units. The exception is maybe this is okay in coastal cities where you just like spam a navy and something like this, and then you just buy the buildings. But the thing is you're generally going to have more of a discount on the gold, and I think it's better to buy the buildings well, actually, you're going to have more of a discount on gold. If you have more of a discount on silver, maybe this gets... Maybe this is... how good this is has to do with your relationship to some extent with how much silver versus gold you have. And if you have way more silver than gold, then truffles are worse. And if you have way more gold than silver, then truffles are a little bit better. I think in either case, you're generally going to be wanting to buy your units, and we're going to put this in D tier. Next up, we have silk. Silk's a little bit hard to rate. It gives 10% extra culture. I think you do need, if we're just thinking of silk compared to whales, I think production is roughly as good as culture. And so this means in order for this to be better than whales, you would need to have more than 50 culture in a city. I think that that's hard to do consistently over the course of like multiple runs and this type of stuff. Often it's going to be giving you closer to like 3 or something. If you have a natural wonder that's absolutely bananas, though, and gives a bunch of culture, then this will become a lot more valuable. We're going to put it into C tier. Next up, we have the clams. Now, the clams give plus a 3 happiness, and then also plus a 3 happiness in an additional plus 3 happiness if you're in distant lands specifically. As just kind of the way things roll out, I think that the happiness is more useful more domestically, and not in distant lands, because this is going to be the places where you have buildings carrying over from the previous age. It's often going to be the places where you need the happiness help, and so this is going to be a lot worse than the 3/3 resources where you're going to be getting an extra 3 stuff, and often the clams will not go to distant lands and will be slot in at home in order to avoid negative unhappiness, and so we're going to put them behind truffles in D tier. Next up, we have the cowlin. Now, cowlin we thought was remarkably bad. In antiquity, it is going to give food and then additional food if you are overseas. But I think that the proportion of your... So generally speaking, you will often upgrade stuff overseas in distant lands, and then that stuff in distant lands, coming back to the math, will actually not have that many growth events having occurred yet. And so this means that the food is actually going to really do work in terms of enabling you to have growth events faster and faster. And so I do think the cowlin goes from being just like, I think C or D tier in the previous age, and then we're going to put it at the end of B tier now. I think that food in general is a much weaker yield than production and even gold, but your ability to target is really what's valuable here, and your ability to get a lot of growth events in overseas territories, especially when those growth events are going to lead to you getting treasure fleet resources faster. I do think that this is a critical play pattern, and so it is going to score quite a bit higher. Next up, we have Jade. Now, Jade, if you have 100 gold, Jade, it gives you 15% extra gold. If you have 100 gold, and that gold is not including any other modifiers, it'll give you 15 gold. I think that gold is roughly a third the value of production, and it's hard to necessarily consistently have 100 gold, but that's definitely a doable mark, and so kind of comparing it to this, I do think that the production is going to be more valuable, but being able to target with production is really valuable. What gold is giving you is a resource where part of its value is the fact that it could go anywhere, and so in terms of slottable resources, being able to target with production, when you can target with production, the value of that production is like 4 times gold. When you can't target with production, the value, I think, is maybe 3 to 1 or something like this. And so getting a percentage modifier on gold, it has to pull even more weight than it otherwise normally would. And I think that gold very often will fail to do that. And so we're going to actually... And so I think that the gold will... I was thinking of putting horses behind silk, but then thought better of it. I think that this will often just kind of underperform. If you have a bunch of gold buildings, like once you enter the like closer ends of the age, when you already have a bank, a guild hall, and all this stuff, or if you have something that's giving gold targeted on a specific place, then it's going to be a lot better. But we're going to put it on C tier with a really heavy-handed asterisk. And that asterisk is that right now, it's unclear to me how trade routes work in terms of where they're giving the gold, and we have seen two different phenomena, one before they patched it, one after. It seems that the trade routes are not applying to cities directly like they were before, and this was the case that was before. I don't know if this is a UI thing, I don't know if we're misunderstanding what's going on, but if you can control where the trade routes are, suddenly gold gets much better. And this is because you could just put the gold where all your trade routes are. My understanding is that previously, the trade routes originate from wherever you build the merchant, independent of where you settle it. Now it seems unclear if that is the trade route gold is localized to that city, but if it is, then it's going to be considerably more valuable because now you can target the modifier on top of one of your gold income bonuses. Or if you have something that gives a ton of gold to a specific city, in terms of your civ / leader, it is going to start to get better. I don't think it'll ever get to A tier, but it does get better and puts properly in B tier. Alright, next up we're going to have incense. Now, incense, I think I'm going to catch some flack for the way I think of it, which is that, look, your missionaries really smooth out the play a lot. When you go for the civic, that gives you, I think it's rationalism, and then another one that give you percentage yields on your cities if they are of your religion. I think that these are really good if you can keep them going. I think one of the ways you can keep them going is in your highest production place, where they just blast construction and finishes all the really good buildings. I think it's really good to just spam missionaries out of there. What this will do is it will give plus 100% production towards building missionaries. And so if you have, if a missionary costs 100 production, which I don't think it does, this will make it so that you can build it in one turn with 50 production. If you have two of these, you can build it in one turn with 33.3 production. And so I think over the course of an age, this actually generates an enormous amount of production in a very constrained way because you have to be building missionaries specifically. I think spamming missionaries out of one place is not that bad. And will really smooth out a lot of things. And so as a consequence, I do think that this generates you a reasonably high production over the course of an age. You know, and it's still difficult to rate because it's not like we have this low production city we're trying to get off the ground. And that low production city we're trying to get off the ground really just needs production now. This is we have a high production city and we're having trouble finding useful stuff to build. We're just going to spam missionaries and smooth out the overall texture of the age for ourselves and make everything really easy by just having a ton of missionaries. And so it's still difficult for me to rate, but I think that we're going to upgrade it higher than where it was on my cheat sheet, just because I think it gives you an enormous volume of overall production over the course of an age, and we're going to put it into A tier. But it's going to be a resource that feels terrible. But in terms of what it is actually giving you over the course of an age, I do think it is pretty good. It's turning a city that is not going to be that good because its production, it's turning production in a city that production wasn't that valuable because it already built all the useful things. It's turning that production into something that's much more valuable. And so by letting you get like half off of merchants, or sorry, not merchants, missionaries. But we're going to have it in A tier, but like a little bit, it feels like it's a C tier, D tier resource. That's how it feels. But I think if you think about how much production it saves you over the course of an age, I think that if you have a 50 production city, right, and it's giving you half off of missionaries, then it's generating 25 production a turn, which, okay, even though you maybe don't want to be spamming missionaries and you're not building missionaries every turn, 25 production is a lot to be getting from one slottable resource. And so even if you're building, you know, half the time you're building missionaries, only half the time it's still going to be 12, right? And so I do think it's quite good, but a little bit less targeted. And so if it was 50%, it would probably be somewhere down here, but it's 100%. Next up, we have the camels. Now, the camels, I think, are way worse than they are in Antiquity, because I think you generally won't have difficulty slotting all your resources. And so camels allowing you to slot resources you could previously not slot is not really a concern for camels anymore, in my opinion. But with that said, it does allow you to target stuff much better. And I think the primary use for camels is going to be when you upgrade distant lands to settlements, or distant land settlements to cities, you're going to have a lot of these distant land bonused resources, like the kaolin, right, like the clams, and like the gypsum. When you upgrade them, very often you won't be able to slot everything in initially, but camels help to do that, and so they turn a 3 yield into a 6 yield, and so they still help you generate yields in that kind of band of time where you do not have enough overseas distant cities to really be as good. And so in this way, they do generate yields, but I think they generate significantly less yields than antiquity, and I think that the targeting as you get up to 15, 16, 17 settlements, slotting in food in one settlement that's low population versus another is not that important. And so I do think that they get quite a lot worse. And so instead of S tier, they're going to be B tier, but they're still going to be solid. Next up, we are going to have the gypsum, which I think is way worse in antiquity, or in exploration age, than antiquity. The reason being is you want to slot production specifically in cities. For like half the age, you're not going to have cities that will get the full 6 production. Instead, they will only get 3 production because it has to be in overseas distant lands to get the full production. And also, I think that overseas distant lands are generally going to benefit a lot from food, per our thinking of the food math, more so, and you just want to create more growth events than you necessarily want to build buildings. You can buy buildings overseas. You generally want to buy the most useful buildings because you're not going to get a chance to, I think, build all of them. And so I do think gypsum gets considerably worse. We're going to put it down in C tier, and we're going to put it ahead of the horses. Next up, we're going to have one that I think is going to be a little bit controversial, and people aren't going to like my take on it, but that's going to be the ivory. Ivory gives a combination of happiness and production. I think, generally speaking, in your your cities that are from the previous age, you will want both of these things in a high density of situations. Basically, anything that's unhappy, you're really happy to have happiness and production, and this is a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb than the 5 happiness, and also you want to have the production in the cities, but you could also slot it into towns. It's flexible. You can use it to play whack-a-mole with the happiness, unhappiness. We're going to put it kind of at the back of A tier here. I do think that this is quite good. Next up, we have the dies. Now, the dies, just plus 5 happiness, can be slotted into towns. Very, very significant and useful because this allows you to play, the whack-a-mole game with the dies specifically. Very often, you'll come up with, if it's a city, elephants will be good there, or ivory will be good there. If it's a town, dates will often be good there for solving the happiness, but this is going to be good in either of those situations, especially with really low happiness kind of situations. And so we're going to we put camels in the wrong spot per our cheat sheet. I think we did want to upgrade them though to B tier. Initially on our cheat sheet we had them in C tier. I think they're fine enough in B tier. But we will put dies just ahead of the kaolin here. I think that being able to target down someplace with really high unhappiness, this is going to, for a lot of places, if you are really unhappy, this is going to be plus 10% to all yields in that city. Because it's 2% per level, this is 5 levels, and you can very often get that out of this. It's not always the case that you can get it out of this, and it's not always going to be applying to a really high, profitability place, and so slightly more variable than the elephants, which will often give 3 production and 6% yields, but okay. Next up, we're going to have fish. Fish are plus 5 food. They do not require to be put in a city. This is pretty valuable. We rate this pretty highly. We're going to put it just behind dies here. Now, I do think that notably there's a pretty big gap between this part of B tier and this part of B tier. I think the dies and the global resources are way better than everything to the right of it, and this is just something I'd want to point out. In fact, we could even move all these up to A tier, and maybe that'd be more reasonable, but I do think that I think that ivory kind of outperforms this by a lot. So we're going to have it with this right here, but just kind of keep in mind that I think that the divide here between, there should almost be another tier below B. In fact, maybe let's do that. Just to like differentiate a little bit here. I think that this is worth doing here. And we will have this kind of tier. Also, it feels nice because we initially wanted to put camels in C tier, and so now they get below B tier, and so we'll have something a little bit more granular. Next up, we have whales +5 production in cities. Now, we do really like targeting with happiness. I think if you're not unhappy or you're solving your happiness problems, this is obviously way better. This is going to be the lowest floor, or sorry, the highest floor out of all the things. 5 production is just always going to be good. You can slot it in on cities. I think it's generally really powerful, and so we are going to be putting it up into just ahead of the elephants, just behind the elephants. Again, as a yield, just in terms of its overall value, I do think production is going to be better than happiness, and so we kind of have to have it ahead of the dies, but the dies are going to have a much higher ceiling. In that if you are having happiness problem, the dies are going to be much better, but this is going to have a much higher floor, where the 5 production is often going to be good. And also, when you just get something rolling or you're working towards a wonder, being able to spam a bunch of production in a particular area is going to be a nice type of situation. Next up, we have food and happiness on the dates. Also, just kind of to point out here, in terms of the ranking, we are ranking production, happiness, food, right? Which should be somewhat evident when we have the production one, the happiness one, the food one, all one tier apart. They're targeted, but this is just the overall. Next up, we have the happiness and food +3/+3 town resource, which is going to be the dates. The dates, I think that very often you're not going to be having happiness problems, specifically where you are going to have low population. And as a consequence, like you have unhappiness because you have specialization, or you've had a city that's been around for a while and have built a whole bunch of stuff, and so I generally think that this one kind of underperforms, and so we're going to put it into a C tier. It's going to be ahead of the gypsum. It's still flexible. You can still put it in towns, but we're going to put it there. And then next up, we are going to have the cotton here. The cotton gives production and food. I think that the overall power of production and food is going to be more valuable than happiness and food. But I do think that the happiness ability to be targeted is going to be a little bit nice on the dates. And both of these combos are awkward. Generally speaking, happiness or food with production is awkward because often your production is in cities where you've had a lot of growth events. It is nice in overseas territories, so putting this in overseas territories is going to be nice, but there's definitely going to be a priority to both the gypsum and the cowlin in terms of what you want to put in overseas first. And so this is going to be awkward from this front, and then this is going to be awkward because food and happiness, generally speaking, the thing that's growing is not unhappy. But I think that this is more useful for targeting and less awkward, so even though the overall yields of happiness and food are worse, we're going to put the cotton down into C tier, which may be controversial because like the yields are really solid, but I think it just ends up being awkward in a lot of the spaces, and so it's going to be pretty far from the other 3 resources, is going to be the C tier ones. Which may be a little bit of a mistake. I really do value the targeting, though, in terms of thinking of the +5 resources as just generally being better. Being able to slot the thing that you want in a town you just founded, just categorically, is just fish. And so if you just founded a town, it's fish all the way, because it's not going to be unhappy, and the production's going to get turned into gold, right? And then if you have someplace that's unhappy, this is just going to be 10% all yields, so it's going to be better than 6% yields and 3 food. The floor on this is really low, and very often this will be really good in cities with conjunction with the dies and the dates to figure out a nice value at which you're not generating any unhappiness, and so so I really do think that the ivory is really good here. So this is going to be the tier list as we have it. Just a kind of quick overview in terms of the thinking on a lot of this is that we are evaluating just from the perspective of the resources themselves, not how many shields they are. We are really, really valuing the treasure fleet resources, not just because they give a little over 10 gold, but because they allow you to do the legacy path. And then we are really generally valuing globals quite highly, right? All the stuff up here is global. And then we are not valuing the stuff that yields as that much relative to antiquity, because it's just not going to be as useful that it is in antiquity. And so hopefully this was a bit instructive and interesting. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and etc. Mostly etc. But other than that, have a good one.